They sleep in ceramite, still slick with the copper scent of the unfaithful. They fast until the spirit begins to consume the marrow, and before the first shot is fired, they lash their own skin into a tapestry of agony. To the Sisters of Battle, suffering isn't a byproduct of war. It is the only prayer their God Emperor deigns to hear. The Imperium does not ask these women for victory, nor for survival. It asks only for the willingness to ignite their own souls and call the resulting inferno faith. I have seen that fire burn hotter than any Prometheum grade, and I have learned that such a flame eventually consumes the hand that strikes the flint. My name is Valerius Crax. I am a brother sergeant of the Angels Penitent, 4th Company. I have walked the ash of 17 systems, standing alongside weeping guardsmen and cold tech priests who whispered litanies to ancient gears. I thought I understood the spectrum of human devotion. I thought I knew what it meant to be a weapon of the throne. I was wrong. I understood nothing until I met Canoness Sarah Malachite and witnessed the price the Adeptus Sororitas extracts from its daughters. The orders reached me while the blood was still drying on Delos Prime. We had spent months in the lightless underhives, purging gene-stealer cults in a grinding war of attrition. We had burned 17 levels down to the bedrock, sealing the transit tunnels with the bodies of the Xenos tainted. I expected the quiet ritual of repair and reconditioning. Instead, Captain Moros summoned me to the strategium of the Penitent Blade. I was to be seconded to the Order of the Ebon Chalice for a pacification of the shrine world Goltha Tertius. The briefing was a hollow thing. Goltha Tertius had slipped into the darkness of heresy, though the reports were shrouded in ecclesiastical doublespeak. The planetary governor had claimed a divine mandate through visions he insisted came from the emperor himself. He had halted the tithe ships and begun tearing down cathedrals to build monuments to his own enlightenment. The response was the only one the Imperium knows. The Sororitas would cleanse the world in a holy pyre. My role was to observe, to document, and to ensure their zeal didn't compromise the wider strategic stability of the sector. It was a political leash, a task we Astartes loathe. The descent was a descent into a nightmare. Goltha Tertius's atmosphere was a choking shroud of gray soot, the incinerated remains of 1 billion holy scrolls and the cities that housed them. As the gunship broke through the cloud layer, the surface looked like a flayed limb. Once a world of floating monasteries and grand basilicas, it was now a landscape of blackened craters and rising smoke. The pilot, a trembling serf, gripped her controls while muttering prayers of protection. The landing zone outside the ruins of Sanctum Primus was a hive of organized fanaticism. Rhino transports idled in perfect rows, their exhausts coughing thick, oily smoke. Immolator tanks stood like iron sentinels, their heavy flamers tracking the ruined skyline with predatory intent. And everywhere there were the Sisters. They wore power armor the color of dried, oxidized blood, trimmed with bone-white ceramite. Every inch of their war gear was etched with microscript, litanies of hate and seals of purity. Even in the brief moments of rest, they seemed coiled, ready to spring into violence. I stepped off the ramp into air that tasted of incense and scorched flesh. The heat was a physical weight, radiating from the engines and the dying world. From the distance came the thunder of artillery, but closer there was a sound more unsettling, the low rhythmic hum of 1,000 voices joined in a hymn of martyrdom. I checked the seals on my Mark 7 plate and walked toward the command tent, the symbol of the ebon chalice fluttering in the hot wind. She was there, standing before a hololith display of the southern continent, Canoness Sarah Malachite. She did not look at me for a long time, her eyes fixed on the tactical map, as if she could burn the heretics away with her gaze alone. When she finally turned, I felt the intensity of her presence like a blow. Her face was a landscape of scars, old, jagged wounds that had been allowed to heal without the vanity of skin grafting. Her skin was pulled tight over high cheekbones, giving her the look of a living saint or a starving predator. Her eyes were the gray of a winter storm, cold and absolute. Her armor was scored and pitted, stained with layers and blood so old they had turned to a dark, permanent rust. She had not cleaned it. To her, the gore of the enemy was a holy vestment. A single purity seal hung over her heart, the wax stamped with the aquila, the parchment bearing a single sentence: "I am the sacrifice. I am nothing." Brother Sergeant Cracks, you are welcome among the faithful, though I fail to see why the angels penitent require a witness to our duty, she said, her voice a rasping growl, as if her throat had been seared from smoke. I am here by the captain's command, Canoness, I replied, inclining my head, to serve as the Emperor wills. He wills only one thing today, she snapped, turning back to the display. At dawn we storm Sanctum Primus. The heretics have fortified the cathedral, thinking stone can shield them from judgment. We will break them, purge the site, and reconsecrate the ground with their blood. You may follow my command squad, Astartes, but do not interfere. Our faith is our shield, and we require no other. She dismissed me with a flick of her hand. I walked out into the gathering dusk. The camp was a place of eerie silence, broken only by the prayers. I saw a young sister, barely 20 years of age, kneeling before a portable altar. She held a wire-braided whip. With mechanical, rhythmic precision, she brought it down over her own shoulders. The sound was a wet crack. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply whispered a name I didn't recognize and struck herself again, her blood pooling on the parched earth. I told myself it was just a different form of discipline. I told myself that we too knew the value of penance. But as I watched her, I saw a light in her eyes that wasn't devotion. It was a hunger, a craving for the end. I realized then that I wasn't here to witness a war. I was here to watch a collective suicide, dressed in the robes of a crusade. Dawn on Gulf Atertes did not bring light, only a deepening of the bruised purple shadows that clung to the ruins. The air was a frozen shroud until the Exorcist missile launchers began their holy orchestration. There is a specific horror to those machines. They play pipe organs to aim their payloads, turning the symphony of a cathedral into the geometry of a massacre. The earth buckled, the sky screamed. Ahead, the Sanctum Primus, once a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, was being ground into a fine white powder by the barrage. The sisters stood in the staging area, a wall of blood-red ceramite and cold iron. They didn't check their chronometers or adjust their seals with the restless energy I've seen in the Imperial Guard. They stood as statues, their helmets locked, their breathing synchronized in a low, collective growl. Canoness Malachite stood at the vanguard. She had refused her helmet. Her scarred face was illuminated by the flickering blossoms of fire on the horizon. She raised her power sword, not as a signal, but as an altar. "Daughters!" she cried, and her voice pierced the thunder of the artillery. "The ground beneath you is a lie. It is soil corrupted by the breath of the apostate.
The air you breathe is a sin until you wash it with the heat of the pyre. Do not seek the shelter of the walls. Do not seek the safety of the trench. Seek only the moment where your life ends and His glory begins. Today we do not march for the Imperium. We march to prove we are worthy to die for it." The response wasn't a shout, it was a roar of song, a hymn of fire. As the barrage lifted, they moved. It was a tactical nightmare. Between our lines and the cathedral lay a kilometer of open plaza, stripped of cover and sighted by heretic heavy-stubbers. Any sergeant worth his stripes would have ordered a flanking maneuver or a smoke-screened advance. Malachite ordered a straight walk. I moved with the command squad, my heavy boots thudding against the cracked marble. The heretics opened fire. Tracer rounds cut through the gloom like glowing needles. I saw a sister to my left, Sister Ilara, I believe, get caught in a burst of autocannon fire. Her shoulder plate shattered, her arms spinning away in a spray of red. She didn't fall. She didn't even break her stride. She adjusted the grip on her bolter with her remaining hand and continued to sing, the melody bubbling through the blood in her throat until a second burst took her head. We walked over her. We walked over dozens of them. The sisters didn't take cover. They simply filled the gaps in the line as their comrades were shredded. It was a conveyor belt of martyrdom. I fired my bolter, the familiar kick against my shoulder, a grounding reality in this madness. My targeting reticle locked onto heavy weapon nests, silencing them with explosive rounds. But for every gun I took out, 3 sisters were claimed by the sheer volume of fire. We reached the breach in the cathedral's main narthex. The interior was a charnel house. The heretics, desperate and fueled by the governor's false visions, had piled pews into barricades and laced the statuary with trip mines. The air inside was thick with the smell of ozone, ancient dust, and the copper tang of fresh slaughter. Close-quarters combat in a cathedral is a special kind of hell. The echoes of bolter fire are deafening, and the shadows are deep enough to hide a man with a chain axe. I saw Malachite disappear into a knot of heretic cultists. Her power sword was a blur of blue-white-hot energy, carving through flesh and flak armor with the indifference of a reaper. A cultist charged her with a melter bomb, his eyes wide with a suicidal fervor that mirrored her own. She didn't dodge. She stepped into the blast, her armor absorbing the searing heat, and decapitated the man before the smoke had even cleared. She was bleeding from a dozen shrapnel nicks, her bone-white trim now entirely red, but her expression remained one of terrifying serenity. We fought upward, through the nave and into the high chancel. The governor was there, cowering behind an altar of obsidian. He was a small man, draped in silks that were stained with the sweat of his own terror. He tried to speak, to claim his visions were true, but Malachite didn't give him the breath. She grabbed him by his throat, her gauntlet crushing his windpipe, and dragged him to the center of the hall. She didn't execute him immediately. She forced him to look at the rows of dead sisters being dragged into piles by their survivors. "Look at the price of your pride," she whispered, and for the first time I heard a sliver of something like grief in her voice, but it was a cold, sharpened grief. "They died to erase the stain of your existence. You are not a man. You are a debt that must be paid." She took his head with a single brutal swing. As his body slumped, she didn't call for a medic or check the perimeter. She dropped to her knees in the spreading pool of his blood. The surviving sisters, many of them missing limbs or clutching leaking wounds, joined her. They knelt in the gore, their voices rising in a song of thanksgiving. I stood apart, my armor splattered with the viscera of 100 men and women. I looked at the ceiling, where the stained glass had been blown out, leaving only the jagged frames like the teeth of a skull. More than half the assault force was gone. They hadn't died for a strategic advantage. They had died because their commander believed their deaths were the most beautiful thing she could offer the throne. I looked at Malachite. She was staring at her own blood-stained hands, and for a fleeting second, I saw her fingers tremble. Not from exhaustion, from a terrible, silent hunger. She wasn't mourning the dead. She was jealous of them.
The conquest of Sanctum Primus was merely the opening movement of a funeral dirge. While the southern cities still smoldered with the heat of the purge, the remnants of the governor's rebellion fled toward the northern wastes, a barren, salt-choked expanse where the air was so thin it felt like breathing powdered glass. The climate turned from a sweltering furnace to a biting, crystalline cold. Frost bloomed like white mold over my power armor, and the wind howled through the jagged rock formations with the sound of 1 billion grieving souls. In any conventional campaign, this would be the stage for a strategic pause. We were low on supplies, the vehicles were grinding their gears against the salt grit, and the soldiers, even the genetically enhanced ones, needed a moment of respite. But the Adeptus Soritaris do not acknowledge the limits of the flesh. To them, fatigue is a temptation of the warp, and hunger is merely an opportunity to fast in his name. We moved in a grim convoy of rhinos and immolators, following ghost trails and fragmentary whispers of the enemy. It was during these 3 weeks in the wastes that I began to see the true rot beneath their devotion. It was not a rot of the soul, but a systematic destruction of the vessel that contained it. I observed Malachite daily. She never removed her armor. The blood that had stained her ceramite in the cathedral had dried into a thick black crust, sealing the joints of her plates. Her movements grew stiff, her gait heavy with the weight of unwashed wounds. I saw her face only once during a brief midday halt. Her skin was the color of old parchment, her eyes sunken into dark hollows of exhaustion. She ate nothing but the barest rations, and even those she seemed to treat as a shameful necessity. The sisters followed her lead with a competitive, terrifying zeal. They did not just endure the hardship, they cultivated it. I watched them skip their sleep rotations to spend hours kneeling in the freezing salt, their foreheads pressed against the rusted hulls of their transports. I saw them refuse medical attention for frostbite, treating the blackened, dead flesh of their fingers as medals of faith. On the 8th night of the pursuit, the convoy halted in a dried riverbed. We had found nothing but empty caves and frozen corpses for days. The silence of the wastes seemed to mock us. Malachite called an assembly. The sisters gathered in a circle, their silhouettes sharp against the pale, sickly moonlight. She stood in the center, her voice cracking as she spoke. 8 days. 8 days of silence. The Emperor's light is shielded from us. Do you know why, daughters? It is not because the enemy is clever. It is because we are unworthy. My leadership has been a hollow thing. My faith has been diluted by the comfort of the march. I watched, paralyzed by a strange, cold. The conquest of Sanctum Primus was merely the opening movement of a funeral dirge. While the southern cities still smoldered with the heat of the purge, the remnants of the governor's rebellion fled toward the northern wastes, a barren, salt-choked expanse where the air was so thin it felt like breathing powdered glass.
The climate turned from a sweltering furnace to a biting crystalline cold. Frost bloomed like white mold over my power armor, and the wind howled through the jagged rock formations with the sound of a billion grieving souls. In any conventional campaign, this would be the stage for a strategic pause. We were low on supplies, the vehicles were grinding their gears against the salt grit, and the soldiers, even the genetically enhanced ones, needed a moment of respite. But the Adeptus Soritaris do not acknowledge the limits of the flesh. To them, fatigue is a temptation of the warp, and hunger is merely an opportunity to fast in his name. We moved in a grim convoy of rhinos and immolators, following ghost trails and fragmentary whispers of the enemy. It was during these 3 weeks in the wastes that I began to see the true rot beneath their devotion. It was not a rot of the soul, but a systematic destruction of the vessel that contained it. I observed Malachite daily. She never removed her armor. The blood that had stained her ceramite in the cathedral had dried into a thick black crust, sealing the joints of her plates. Her movements grew stiff, her gait heavy with the weight of unwashed wounds. I saw her face only once during a brief midday halt. Her skin was the color of old parchment, her eyes sunken into dark hollows of exhaustion. She ate nothing but the barest rations, and even those she seemed to treat as a shameful necessity. The sisters followed her lead with a competitive, terrifying zeal. They did not just endure the hardship, they cultivated it. I watched them skip their sleep rotations to spend hours kneeling in the freezing salt, their foreheads pressed against the rusted hulls of their transports. I saw them refuse medical attention for frostbite, treating the blackened, dead flesh of their fingers as medals of faith. On the 8th night of the pursuit, the convoy halted in a dried riverbed. We had found nothing but empty caves and frozen corpses for days. The silence of the wastes seemed to mock us. Malachite called an assembly. The sisters gathered in a circle, their silhouettes sharp against the pale, sickly moonlight. She stood in the center, her voice cracking as she spoke. 8 days. 8 days of silence. The Emperor's light is shielded from us. Do you know why, daughters? It is not because the enemy is clever. It is because we are unworthy. My leadership has been a hollow thing. My faith has been diluted by the comfort of the march. I watched, paralyzed by a strange, cold horror, as she reached for a ritual whip, a discipline of braided wire and obsidian shards. She stripped the breastplate from her torso, exposing a body glove that was shredded and soaked with a mixture of old and fresh blood. Her back was a geography of ruin, a landscape of scars upon scars, many of them weeping with infection. She began to lash herself. The sound was a rhythmic, wet thwack that echoed off the canyon walls. With every strike, a spray of red hit the salt, turning the white ground into a grisly mosaic. She didn't scream, she didn't even moan. Instead, she recited the litany of contrition, her voice gaining strength with every blow. The sisters watched in a trance of ecstatic devotion, some of them weeping, others mirroring her movements with their own hands. 40 lashes for 40 hours of failure, she cried out. When she finished, she was trembling, her legs threatening to buckle. She did not seek a medic. She simply pulled her armor back over the raw, open meat of her shoulders, the metal grinding against the wounds. She turned to the assembly, her eyes glowing with a feverish, sickly light. Tomorrow we find them. He has seen our pain. He is satisfied. Later that night, I found Sister Superior Cassia maintaining her bolter. She was one of the few who still seemed to possess a shred of tactical awareness, though her hands shook from the cold. I asked her, Why? My voice low. She is destroying herself. She is destroying all of you. A commander who cannot stand is of no use to the throne. This isn't war, Cassia. This is a slow, agonizing suicide. Cassia looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something human in her eyes. Pity. You think in terms of efficiency, Astartes. You were built to survive. To you, the body is a weapon that must be oiled and maintained. But to us, the body is a cage. It is the wall between us and the Emperor. It's a wall that keeps you alive to fight his enemies, I countered. Life is a cheap currency. Anyone can fight, anyone can kill, but to suffer, that is the only thing we can give that has absolute value. The canoness does not whip herself to find the enemy. She whips herself to prove that she doesn't care if she ever finds them, so long as she dies in the seeking. Her scars are her authority. We follow her because she has traveled further into the darkness of pain than any of us. I walked the perimeter of the camp, my hand tight on the grip of my bolter. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I had fought alongside the greatest heroes of the Imperium, but here, among these women, I felt like a stranger to my own species. They had weaponized their own frailty. They had turned agony into a theological necessity. I looked back at the command rhino where Malachite sat in the dark, bleeding into her own armor. I realized then that they didn't want to win this war. They wanted to be the fuel that kept the fire of the Imperium burning, and they didn't care if the fire consumed the enemy or just themselves. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow and old blood. Somewhere in the dark, a sister began to sing a hymn. It was a song about a girl who walked into a furnace to prove she loved the sun. As I listened, I realized
The heretic stronghold was a jagged wound in the earth, a box canyon guarded by steep, serrated ridges that looked like the teeth of a starving predator. Below, nestled in the shadows of the rock, the remnants of the governor's forces had dug in with the desperation of cornered rats. They had heavy stubbers, several salvaged autocannons, and a clear 2-kilometer field of fire across a flat, white salt plain. It was a perfect killing ground. Any novice scout would have seen it. A frontal assault was a death sentence. I stood beside Canoness Malachite on a ridge overlooking the site. My tactical display was alive with red runes, highlighting the interlocking fields of fire. "We should hold the rim," I said, my voice modulated through my helmet's vox grill. "Contain them. I can vox the penitent blade for a precision orbital strike, or we can wait for the remaining artillery to crawl up from the south. In 3 days, we can turn this canyon into a tomb without losing a single soul." Malachite turned her head slowly. Her hood was pulled back, her gray hair whipping in the freezing gale. Her skin was so translucent I could see the blue veins pulsing in her temples. She looked less like a woman and more like a ghost that had forgotten to leave the world. 3 days of waiting is 3 days of allowing their blasphemy to breathe, she replied. Her voice was thin, like wind through dry bone. "You speak of souls as if they are a resource to be hoarded, Astartes. We do not seek to preserve our lives, we seek to spend them. If we call down fire from the sky, what have we proven? That we have ships? That we have physics? No. We will walk across that salt. We will show them that even when their lead tears our flesh and their fire melts our armor, our faith is the only thing that remains standing." "It is tactical madness," I growled. "It is theological necessity," she countered. "Prepare your weapons, Sergeant, or stay here and watch how the daughters of the Emperor earn their place at his side." She didn't wait for a response.
She stepped down from the ridge and joined her lines. The order was given, a slow, measured advance in line formation. No rushing, no seeking cover, just a steady, rhythmic march into the mouth of the meat grinder. The slaughter began when we were still a kilometer out. The first shells of the autocannon struck the salt with the force of falling stars. I saw a sister to my right pulverized, not just killed, but erased, leaving only a spray of red mist and a few fragments of bone-white ceramite. The line did not waver. They began to sing. It was a low, mournful melody that grew louder as the fire intensified. I marched with them, my pulse rates steady, though every instinct of my training screamed at me to sprint or dive. I watched a sister superior take a heavy stubber round to the thigh. Her leg buckled, the bone shattered, but she didn't stop. She dragged herself forward on her hands, her bolter still barking, her voice still joined in the hymn until a second round punched through her chest. They weren't just dying, they were competing for the honor of it. I saw sisters stepping into the path of fire meant for their comrades, not just to protect them, but to ensure they were the ones to fall. There was an ecstatic abandon in their eyes, a terrifying, rapturous joy. They weren't fighting the enemy, they were flirting with their own annihilation. By the time we reached the canyon entrance, the salt was no longer white. It was a slick, crimson slush. We had lost 60 sisters in 20 minutes. Inside the canyon, the fighting became a chaotic, claustrophobic nightmare. The heretics realized that even lead and fire couldn't stop this red tide, and panic set in. I moved like a whirlwind of silver and black, my chainsword screaming as it tasted the heretics' fear. But even in the heat of combat, I couldn't look away from the sisters. I saw one, her flamer empty, use her own body to shield a younger novice from a melt-a-blast. She turned into a pillar of living fire, a screaming torch that walked 5 steps toward the enemy before collapsing into a charred heap. The novice didn't weep. She didn't even look back. She simply picked up the fallen flamer and kept moving. Malachite was at the heart of it. She fought with a reckless, frantic energy. Her power sword carved glowing arcs through the gloom. She took a hit to the shoulder that would have floored a man, and a shrapnel shard had opened a deep gash across her brow, drenching her face in red. She looked like a demon of the pit, laughing as she struck. When the last heretic was silenced, the canyon was a tomb of smoke and the smell of roasted meat. The survivors did not cheer, they did not check their wounds. They immediately began the count of the dead, whispering the names of the honored with a reverence that made my skin crawl. Malachite stood in the center of the carnage, leaning on her sword. Her breathing was a wet, ragged sound. "You see, Valerius?" she gasped, her eyes searching mine through my visor. "They died, beautifully. They died proving that no wall is high enough, no gun is loud enough to silence a soul that wants to return to him. They died for a pile of salt and a few empty caves," I snapped, the anger finally breaking through my discipline. "You wasted them. You could have had this victory for nothing. Instead, you paid for it in the best blood of the Imperium." She smiled then, a bloody, terrible expression. "There is no victory without a price. If the price is 0, then the victory is worthless. We are the currency of the throne, and today we were very expensive." She turned away, but as she did, her knees finally gave out. She didn't fall like a warrior, she collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I reached out to catch her, but Sister Cassia stepped between us, her face a mask of cold fury. "Do not touch her," she hissed. "You do not have the right to hold her, you who value your life more than your faith. You are a ghost in a machine, Astartes. We are the only ones truly alive." That night, the sisters held a vigil, not of mourning, but of celebration. They sang for hours, their voices echoing through the canyon, praising the martyrs who had managed to escape the world. I sat alone by the perimeter, cleaning the blood of both heretic and sister from my armor. I realized then that the Sisters of Battle weren't just an army, they were a weapon designed to break the heart of anyone who witnessed them. They didn't just kill the enemy, they killed the idea of hope, of survival, of a future. They were a cult of the grave, and I was trapped in their wake. The shadows of the canyon seemed to stretch, reaching for us. And in the flickering light of the funeral pyres, I saw Malachite staring into the fire, her eyes wide and vacant. She wasn't looking at the flames, she was looking at something behind them, something that was waiting for the rest of us.
The 73rd day of the campaign broke over a narrow, suffocating valley in the northern polar reaches. This was the end of the line. Intelligence, what little remained of our logic engines, indicated that the final 5,000 heretics had gathered here. But as I looked through my multi-spectrum visor from the cliff edge, I didn't see an army. I saw a pathetic, starving exodus. Civilians, elderly men clutching rusted tools, mothers shielding infants with rags. They were huddled together against the biting wind, waiting for a dawn that would never be kind to them. They were already dead. Hunger and the wastes would have claimed them in a week. There was no strategic need for a bullet, let alone a massacre. "They are defeated, Canoness," I said, my voice heavy with a weariness that bypassed my gene-enhanced stamina. "Contain the valley. Let the elements do the work. We have secured the world. There is no glory in this." Malachite didn't even look at me. She was strapped into her armor with wire and luck, her breathing a wet, whistling sound in the cold air. She looked like a corpse that had been reanimated by sheer spite. "Glory?" she whispered, and the word was a fleck of bloody foam on her lips. "You still think we do this for glory, Astartes? We do this for purity. Every second an apostate draws breath, the emperor's realm is poisoned. Every child taught the governor's lies is a seed of future damnation. We do not grant the mercy of time. We grant the mercy of fire." She raised her sword, a jagged, blackened thing now, and the remaining 300 sisters began their descent. It was not a battle, it was a harvest. The sisters descended the valley walls like red and bone angels of the pit. They didn't fire from a distance to minimize risk. They walked into the thick of the huddled masses with their flamers roaring. I have heard the screams of 1,000 battlefields, but the sound of that valley, it was a choir of the damned. The Prometheum clung to the refugees, turning them into living candles that illuminated the sisters' faces. I saw Sister Cassia methodically executing a row of kneeling men, her bolter barking with a rhythmic, bored precision. I fought because my orders were to stay with the command squad, but my hearts weren't in it. I moved like a machine, parrying the pathetic lunges of starving men and ending them with a clinical stroke. Around me, the sisters were in a state of religious ecstasy. They were laughing through their hymns. They were stepping over burning children to find the next sinner. When the last scream finally died away, the valley floor was a lake of charred meat and melted snow. The air was a thick, greasy soup of human ash. Malachite stood at the center of the carnage. She wasn't standing tall, she was swaying, her sword tip buried in the scorched earth to keep her upright. I walked toward her, my boots crunching on something that might have been a rib cage. "It is finished. The world is compliant. Are you satisfied?" She turned to me, and for the first time I saw her eyes clearly. They weren't filled with triumph. They were hollow, empty,
as if the fire she had carried for so long had finally burned through the back of her skull. "I am complete," she whispered, her hand crooked and trembling, reaching for my gauntlet. I knelt beside her. "I am here, Canoness. Do you understand the riddle of the fire?" she asked, her voice a ghost of a rasp. "I understand that it consumes everything it touches," I replied. She smiled, and a single tear of blood ran down her cheek. "No, the riddle is, what happens to the light when the fuel is gone? We burned so brightly to show him we cared, but the dark is so much larger than we were told." Her eyes widened, fixing on a point somewhere above my shoulder. A look of profound, soul-shattering terror crossed her face, the first time I had ever seen her afraid. Her grip on my hand tightened with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. "It wasn't him," she choked. "The voice in the fire. It wasn't—" Her breath hitched, and she died. She died with that expression of horror frozen on her face, her sightless eyes staring into a void I could not see. The sisters began their final hymn, a song of welcome for her soul, but I could not join them. I stood and walked out of the tent into the freezing night. I am back aboard the Penitent Blade now. My official report is filed. It speaks of casualties, compliance, and the heroic martyrdom of the Ebon Chalice. But I have kept a second record, a record of the things Malachite whispered at the end. There is a shadow over Gulfa Tertius that the Flamers did not purge. The world is compliant, but the silence in the northern wastes feels like a bated breath. I find myself looking at my own hands, wondering if the light we carry is truly ours, or if we are merely the tinder for something that finds our suffering amusing. I still hear the rhythm of her whip in my dreams, and sometimes when I stare into the golden glow of the ship's engine core, I see her face. She isn't praying, she is screaming, and she is trying to tell me that the fire didn't go out. It just found a new place to burn.